Welcome everyone to Urban Strategy in the present tense. My name is Andrew Zitzer. I'm an associate professor of urban strategy at Drexel here in Philly. And this series, Urban Strategy in the Present Tense, is an opportunity to explore the connections among systems, that cities are systems of systems. And we talk about how these systems intersect with people who are really doing important work at the intersection of lots of urban challenges. And I just want to lead off by noting that we're all experiencing a very tumultuous and rapidly changing environment. And we're going to be talking about some exciting and proactive and complicated work that Matt and his colleagues are doing. And that is a space of great hope for me and a place of refuge, knowing that at the local level, we continue to act in solidarity and support each other. And so, not to distract or take away from the sense of uncertainty that many of us are feeling, but to just know that we're thinking about that even as we're talking about things that are important to us locally and very hopeful in their way. So I'll just lead off by welcoming our incredible guest today, Matthew Rader, the president of the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. Our conversation today is going to be called From the Ground Up, Building Stronger Cities with Plants and Trees. And we're going to explore how horticulture can enhance health, well-being, and urban vibrancy. Two quick housekeeping notes. For the best experience, please set your screen to speaker view. And also throughout the conversation, we encourage you to share your thoughts and questions in the chat. We'll bring some of your questions to Matt in the final moments of the program. But just to introduce Matt a little more, Matthew Rader is the president of the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, PHS, and a non-resident distinguished fellow at the Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation here at Drexel University, which powers this series. Focusing on expanding PHS efforts using horticulture to advance the health and well-being of the communities in Greater Philadelphia and beyond. Matt combines a passion for horticulture with a deep love for historic preservation and cities. Matthew grew up in Mercersburg, Pennsylvania, received his bachelor's in architectural history from the University of Virginia and master's in business administration from the Wharton School. He's a 2020 Eisenhower Fellow. For me, PHS stands out for balancing big picture vision with practical, community-led action, driving greening efforts at the neighborhood, citywide, and regional levels. Today, Matt and I are going to take a closer look at several neighborhood and citywide initiatives that PHS has been helping to lead. At the heart of our conversation is the larger question of, can horticulture strengthen our cities? So thank you so much for joining us today, Matt.
Very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And Matt, I'm reflecting on the fact that in my class last night, we had Hinge Collective talking about the Philly Tree Plan and the engagement across many sectors, and just really talking about how residents understand their connection to trees and horticulture and how that conversation is evolving. So, your work is certainly on my mind right now.
Yeah, very timely and topical. And a lot of our work right now is taking that from plan to reality, which is exciting.
And what they were saying is that many of those short-term goals actually are being addressed and met, and that's just such good news.
Yes.
So before we dive into those specific projects, can you just talk a little bit about the role of Pennsylvania Horticultural Society in Philadelphia and beyond, and what should people know about your mission and the impact that it strives to make?
So the role of the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society is to try to unlock the power of the very human act of growing and cultivating plants to positively impact our society and environment. That's the purpose. And there's an enormous number of ways to do that. And I think there's sort of three ideas to keep in mind. So the first is that the ability to grow plants, which is something that exists in most, if not all, cultures, is a way to change the world, right? Cultivating a plant changes you, cleans air and water, transforms the physical environment, inspires somebody else, creates food. It's really essential, and it's transformative, and it's accessible to everyone. The second idea that animates our work is that the urban environment itself, the built and intangible social environment of a city, can be harnessed to improve life in that city, right? So it can create economic opportunity, it can create safety, it can create social cohesion. And we believe that horticulture is a really attainable and effective tool to take that urban environment and turn it into something that supports a healthier life for everyone. And then the third idea that animates PHS is that while almost anybody can take action through horticulture to improve their life and the environment around them, there can be obstacles that are hard to unstick. And so what we try to do is help make it possible for someone to realize their vision for what they want to do and make it happen. So that might be as simple as you want to see your street lined with trees, you pulling that off on your own is going to be really challenging. Us coming behind you and creating an advocacy environment and programs and networks to other individuals that can help you make it happen is what unlocks. So it all begins with individual aspiration and community aspiration, but we help to make that easier and we help to bring it to scale. And our job is to make that happen. So we work all over the city and region. We're in about 230 different neighborhoods, and we'll dig into some facets of our work, but at the highest level, it's about unlocking horticulture's potential. It's about bringing together the people, the money, the resources, the capability needed to make that happen, and then allowing action to happen at the individual and neighborhood level throughout the region.
And PHS is a really old organization. It's a legacy organization. Can you just tell us a little bit about its origins and how it's transformed in the time that you've been there and sort of like, its mission?
Yeah, so we're founded in 1827, so almost 200 years old. And we really started as a club for people that wanted to elevate the quality of horticulture in Greater Philadelphia, which is both production of ornamental gardens as we think about today, but also fruit and berries are counted as horticulture as well. And fast forward from then to the early 20th century, PHS shifted from kind of a professional tier to an amateur tier, much more embracing of women, much more geographically diverse, and starting to engage with people at all levels of horticultural interest. And then fast forward again to the early 70s, which was a time of escalating interest in environmental conservation and policy under the Nixon administration, the birth of Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act. PHS took a really courageous step to say that it would not just exist to serve its members, but it would also exist to serve the greater city. And that was the origin of a program once called Philadelphia Green that began to work with neighborhoods to use horticulture as a means of community development. And under my tenure, which is I'm in my 10th year, we really pulled the whole organization together around that purpose of using horticulture to advance health and well-being and began to imagine ways to use all of our tools from the Philadelphia Flower Show to our work in neighborhoods to our public gardens and landscapes and membership to advance that common purpose of unlocking horticulture's potential to build a healthier world.
You know, um, so many people know the flower show, and it's an international destination and just a crown jewel of the Philadelphia calendar. Like everyone knows, when it's happening, and everyone's so excited about it. And I've watched as it's weathered the pandemic and figured out how to be in different kinds of places and continue to sustain this conversation. And it's a lot of people don't know below the surface the incredible work that PHS does in neighborhoods. And this work is really interesting to me because so many times there's an opposition between the urban and the city and the country. So, a lot of people think urban agriculture or urban horticulture, like what's that? This is a concrete jungle. And, in the reports that the city has put together and in the Philly Tree Plan, things like the difference between the hottest neighborhood and the coolest, most shaded neighborhood is 22 degrees. And it's life and death for people in this city and in cities around the country. And so it's so important to really link all those pieces of the conversation around health and public safety and education and just real. There's so many pieces that horticulture in the city touches that as an urbanist, I don't think I was always aware of.
Yeah, I think it's a way to think about it is, a city is buildings and streets and infrastructure and people. And horticulture is actually this soft layer that infuses all of that, right? So from the individual who finds creative or cultural expression in growing a plant on their windowsill that maybe was given to them by a friend or a grandparent or something, all the way to, creating the grandest garden or park in a city. It's this tool that adds a richness to life and actually humanizes the urban environment. And I think the most fundamental thing we can't forget is that, like, growing a plant is how we get clean air and water and food. Like, it is incredibly fundamental. And it is also this incredibly powerful tool for people to express themselves, because almost anybody can find the supplies to at least grow something, right? And that in turn provides those contributions of clean air, water, food, inspiration for you, and potentially inspires somebody else with a creativity or a story. And it's a really powerful thing from the most micro to the most macro scale. And like you say, it's often overlooked because we think of cities as, big, hard, expensive elements, and horticulture almost goes unseen.
Yeah, I love that dual framing, that it's both about the quality of life and the richness of life, and also fundamentally sustaining life. Without it, we wouldn't even be here. So
Yeah.
it's operating on so many levels that we can play with. And I want to get into specific projects and programs that you and the organization, employed it to speak to those different levels. But before I get to there, I need you to tell us when the flower show is this year so we can mark our calendars.
We started building the flower show today, and the flower show opens to members on February 28th, next Friday, and then to the public March 1st, and runs through the 9th. And, you mentioned the flower show, but I think for those of you who may not know it or may not have been, it's incredibly special. So it is a fundraiser for our work in neighborhoods. It's our biggest fundraiser. It's also a top 5 event of its kind in the world. And something that we have worked hard at is to cultivate the flower show itself as a driver of social impact. So you will see exhibitors there representing the best thinking in how to use horticulture for social environmental impact. You'll see expansive diversity of lived experience of exhibitors in the flower show, and it itself creates incredible economic opportunity for the exhibitors, for high school students who are creating exhibits. And then it has a whole section that is just everybody exhibiting their plants, their artistic creations. So it's a arts and culture output created by more than 3,000 people from this region and far beyond, and then judged by experts from around the world. So it's a pretty incredible expression of the creativity and talent of this region.
Yeah, amen to that. It's really special, and I encourage everyone to attend, both to enjoy and also to support the ongoing work of PHS. So let's talk a little bit about some of these programs. So just to highlight a few key projects in the city, one aspect that we're so interested in is how PHS works as part of a coordinated network of community organizations, small businesses, and government to bring green solutions to life around the region. So can you talk a little bit about specifically the relationship between trees and vacant land?
Yeah. So I want to talk about our vacant land work, and actually Melissa Stutzbach, who runs this program, is in the audience. So I just want to shout her out. Um, so you describe PHS as working in a network. So zoom out to the city scale. Philadelphia has something around 30,000 vacant parcels, for 30, 40,000. It changes because of development. And historically, these were unmanaged, right? The city viewed them as private land for private owners to care for. If they were blighted, they would be ticketed or fined, but really it was a private issue. And there, with PHS advocacy with some partners, there was a major change in policy in the 20 plus years ago that began to see vacant land as a common problem contributing to social challenge, right? So if this is the condition that you live across the street from or walk by on the way to work, this has an impact on you. And so a pilot was begun, and I think we can flip ahead, Hazel. A pilot was begun to experiment with transforming those vacant lots from the condition we saw to this condition, and to do it as a public expense in order to access the social good. So at this point, we now provide this treatment on 13,000 different parcels around the city. And there's some subtleties to it that I think are important. So the first is, it's not just a matter of like mowing the weeds down and planting grass. It's a matter of removing debris from buildings that were raised, installing good soil, turf, this post and rail fence, and trees where appropriate. then maintaining it twice a month in most cases, now finally year round after many years. And from that, we found that gun violence significantly reduces within these areas up to 30%, and people's self-reported feelings of depression reduced by nearly 70%. So a radical change in safety and health. We also, by design, try to use this program to build economic opportunity. So you could have gone and hired, the largest landscape contractor in the world to come in and mow these sites twice a month. But what we actually did was build a program that engages neighborhood level nonprofits and small businesses in doing this work and carrying them on a journey over time as they take on increasingly complex work as they grow. And then we've built a whole workforce training program that actually prepares people to work in those jobs. So now we have 36, 38 contractors, the vast majority of which are Black or Brown or women led. And we have about 300 people working in this program. We're training 42 new graduates right now for workforce training program. And so it's created an entire ecosystem that not only delivers safety and health outcomes to neighborhoods, but it's also creating a pathway to economic opportunity for residents, small businesses, and nonprofits. And it's that kind of multi-layer thinking and then working across this, crazy network of community organizations, CDCs, small businesses, nonprofits, but doing the work to allow them all to become part of this network that makes the program be successful both at the local level in the neighborhood, but also at the citywide scale, which is where impact really comes from. And PHS really thrives in being kind of at the center of that network. And sometimes I call it like being the light magnet in a field of iron filings. You're trying to keep people aligned around a common objective. You're trying to keep the program model clear and structured enough that it can be implemented at scale and accountable to funders, but also nimble enough that it can vary at the neighborhood level to reflect different needs and different opportunities. And trees we could touch on more later, but it's a similar idea. In that one, it's volunteer driven rather than paid. But we have a wonderful structure in the tree tender program where neighborhoods have tree tender groups that are trained and supported by PHS. We work with those groups to recruit permission from property owners to plant trees, to secure permits. We procure the trees, we cut the pits, the neighborhood resident volunteers plant the trees and care for them. And again, you get this wonderful combination of a regional network sufficient to attract resources and scale the work and do the advocacy, but also a neighborhood level expression that lets it have a high level of ownership and success and customization at the neighborhood level. So mastering that ability to weave together people into networks, to bring together money, to bring together ideas, to bring together execution, and allow it to exist both at the big scale of city or region, but also at the micro scale of neighborhood is how we specialize in creating impact.
Matt, I live in West Philadelphia, which I think is the world epicenter of tree tenders. It's like everyone I know, including me, have gone through the program.
Thank you.
And it's awesome. And I think what's so powerful about it, not just the tree tenders, but also the vacant land care, is that, I was living in Philadelphia in the 90s before this program was really up and running, when there was so many demolitions of vacant homes for safety reasons. And that was very necessary. And I think as part of that effort, really having PHS and partners step up to the table created a feeling that like our neighborhoods were not out of control, and that it wasn't something that was like happening to us with a city that had shrunk at the time and is thankfully now growing again, but really just a sense that like someone cared. And the fact that it now is a program that employs local contractors and develops them as business people. Hinge was telling us last night that some of the folks in King Sessing and Southwest Philadelphia were able to build a business because of the financial lift that their work for this program gave them, and now they have a full-fledged business with many clients. So that economic development piece that's localized really creates a sense of agency and voice in the neighborhoods, and it would be a lot easier, I'm sure, to hire the biggest contractor in the world to just do it. But that's not the point, right? The point is to really reclaim the sense of sovereignty from neighborhood to neighborhood and let people know that they're actually not alone, but they're connected across the city in a network of folks who really care about place.
And it kind of goes back to that idea I started with, that you want to harness the city itself as a tool to help generate life positive health and life outcomes. And so to your point, like we can harness the creation of cleaning green vacant land or trees planted to also yield small business opportunity, to do that with an emphasis on businesses that historically have not had the same wealth creation success as other businesses. And it starts to become a really transformational positive versus just, putting a tree in the ground and making sure it stays watered, which will have some benefits, but not the full array of benefits. And we try to unlock all those levels of potential.
So when we think about that scope of regional impact and local ground up solutions, let's sort of talk about that in the context of the tree canopy and the Philly Tree Plan and the connection that you're doing between the Philly Tree Coalition and all the other partners, because this is really something that I don't think a lot of us are talking about as an urgent ecological and sort of social and health problem, and I think it's just really important to highlight that.
Yeah. So I think there's an idea for people that the way things change in cities is, somebody does a policy analysis, finds a gap, comes up with a solution, goes to City Hall or Harrisburg or Washington, somebody passes a law and says it must be, writes a check, and then it happens, right? That's I think the theory of change for many people. But that's actually not at all how things change in cities. That's actually how really unsuccessful things happen in cities. The way successful things happen is people, individuals, residents, policymakers, uh, elected officials start to converge around something they'd like to do. And that might initiate from an activist or from an article in the New York Times or you name it. But you get convergence, and then you actually give everyone a way to contribute, right? And make it happen. And you start to build large groups of people who are very much attached to the work, who will then not only do it, but will protect it and advocate it for it, even if the money disappears or the thing hits a hurdle, like people will want to see it through. And I think the story of trees in Philadelphia is a good illustration of this. So Philadelphia's tree canopy is owned by the city. That is a fact, and it's the responsibility of the Department of Parks and Recreation, whether they're trees in parks or on streets. And for many, 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 many years, Philadelphia and many other cities really managed tree canopy with a mindset of taking care of what was there, right? So there's a tree, we need to prune it, we need to care for it, but there was no sense that like the collective tree canopy was a civic asset the same way we would think about, like, I don't know, the library system or schools or transit, right? So in our mind, if a neighborhood didn't have transit service, we would say something is wrong, right? But if a neighborhood didn't have trees, that same thing didn't trigger. And so the radical rethink, which Catherine Ott Lovell as Parks and Recreation Commissioner and Erica Smith Fitchman as City Forester has led, is really this idea that we should have a healthy urban tree canopy citywide because it yields significant benefits, not only clean air and water, reduced asthma, but also done through methods like tree tenders, social cohesion, involvement, opportunity for small businesses, you name it. And so we need to not just take care of what we have, but we need to make sure that we have the full possible urban forest that we can achieve. And that is what the Philly Tree Plan is about. So it looks at today's urban forest, which is distributed in such a way that the areas where the fewest trees and therefore the greatest heat and the worst health outcomes from dirty air often correlate with the neighborhoods with the least economic opportunity, and in many cases, the highest share of Black and Brown residents. And it says, okay, we got to solve this. Let's build an urban forest, urban tree canopy that is healthy for Philadelphia. Lays out a good plan, thinks about starting in the areas with the most inequitable impacts of lack of tree canopy today, And then what's really novel about it is it thinks from the beginning about how we're going to get it done. So there are many plans that, give you the perfect answer and then they sit on the shelf forever, right? And the Philly Tree Plan said, look, there's a bunch of different organizations involved in planting and caring for the urban forest. What we need to do is actually organize all of those groups into one collaborative. And then we need to go out and seek money from lots of different sources: city government, philanthropy, federal government, PHS members, everybody who buys a flower show ticket, you name it, and lots of effort from people like tree tender volunteers, corporations that want to do corporate volunteer days. And we want to be able to channel all of that into one center that can keep track of what the next step is on the plan and allocate those resources to where they're best. So we formed with Parks and Rec and PHMC and others the Philly Tree Coalition, which is that joint venture that brings together all of those different players into a really organized entity to make sure that we resource and implement this plan. And if there's a takeaway from this, I think it's twofold. One is the power of bringing people together in formal structures to get something done rather than each person kind of doing their own thing. And then the more important message that it literally is everybody, right? So a person who joins PHS for $50 a year or buys a flower show ticket is as important as the federal agency that makes a major grant or the person that volunteers their time as a tree tender. Everybody is critical to this plan. And the Philly Tree Coalition tries to bring all of them together and organize around common purpose so that we all get the result of the tree canopy that we deserve.
I think that's an important lesson, both on the level of governance and also specific to the situation of trees. From a governance level, I think you're right that people think government is sort of something out there that does things for us or to us. And I'm reminded of the work of Bruce Katz and Jeremy Nowak 10 years ago, this idea of the new localism, that we really need to have a self-help approach at the local level. And governance is not just a product of government, but it's a coordinated effort by all the stakeholders to achieve a common aim. And that is democracy. And then when one piece of that democracy is stretched really thin, the networks, the sort of social and political ties that are made in processes like you're describing can be leaned on as one piece is struggling to find its footing, that we have other ways of supporting. And even in the midst of the possibility of some removal of federal resources, some folks have been saying, well, that's an opportunity for us as a region or as a city to reckon with, well, what are our priorities? What are we going to do? How are we going to fund it? And that's not to say we're happy with the status quo, but it means that we aren't relying on government as an object out there that is at our, that is outside of our whims, that we actually are making these coalitions.
I think I think you're right. And I think I can't understate the impacts that changes in federal policy and funding will have on this work and all work related to the public realm and shared services. But I can also agree with you that I think we can often underrate the importance of civil society and nonprofit organizations. So that is really the envy that other countries often have for the US is this incredible array of uh, small scale, large scale voluntary organizations that accomplish things. And it's something to celebrate. And I think it is something that is important in any era for people to make the change they want to see in the world. And I sometimes feel that while political contributions are important, I think in some ways they achieved a marketing scale that they became the only way people could imagine that they could affect change in the world. And I think that investing time and money in nonprofit organizations is an incredibly powerful way to act on change, sometimes in a more immediate way for you.
I agree. And I think, when we talk about trees as this idea of systems, it is really my understanding is the necessity for the tree plan comes from the loss of canopy, the recognition of loss of tree canopy. And we think about solving the climate crisis sometimes in very arcane and expensive ways, like cloud seeding or, changing all these crazy caps and trades and stuff like that. And sometimes we just need to plant a million trees, and we can do that one at a time, or 10 at a time, or 100 at a time, and activate a reparative. My understanding of the plan is that it's very much a reparative plan, where decisions that have been made by government and the real estate industry over the course of 100+ years created the conditions of a very inequitable tree canopy that was very much threatened. And that has material effects on people's, as you said, their depression, the gun violence, their health. And by repairing that, we're not only repairing our climate, but we're also repairing our political and social relations. So it's so interconnected.
And I think there's a tricky subtlety in what you said, which I largely agree with. Um, there are intentional decisions about how cities were built that have resulted in inequities. There's also an enormous amount of negligence, right? So not considering. And trees in many ways fall into that second bucket, which is intentional decisions not to forest are far less common than just not thinking about trees and community gardens and quality green spaces as an integral part of the urban environments as we built them. And and to your point, then those environments are not ones that are great for human or social life. So we have to backwards engineer them in. But it while there certainly were times where it was intentional decisions, it's more negligence and just missing the importance of building environments that incorporate all of these systems. And then even more so in cities, particularly failure to resource the maintenance of them. In cities, a truth always is that capital dollars are easier than operating dollars, right? So you can get money to build something, and unfortunately, green things need maintenance or else they die. And the only thing worse than no garden is a dead garden, as a friend Joan Riley used to say. And I think that's why green elements in many cases were deprioritized in cities, because cities just couldn't maintain them. And that brings us full circle back to the value of having entities like PHS building these networks of small businesses and volunteer organizations and others that can bring the attention and care to spaces that cities actually can't provide, even if they're resourced to do so.
I agree. And we have a question from the audience, which is from Donna, who asks if PHS is still involved in the 1 million trees project, and how has that transformed over the years?
Yeah, so maybe 15, 16 years ago, PHS launched a Million Trees initiative before me. Uh, we we actually have stopped counting, and it's been a number of years. We decided to focus on the idea of continually caring for and growing the urban forest and the stewards of the urban forest. So we've scaled our tree planting significantly from shy of 2,000 trees a year to closer to 3,000 trees a year. And we've scaled our tree tender group now to almost 6,000 people trained as tree tenders. And with the Philly Tree Coalition to implement the Philly Tree Plan, really scaling up our role as both a policy leader and an actor to both plant and care for the urban tree canopy. So while we don't keep that million tree count, we're ticking up, and we're really focused on long-term building and care of the urban forest.
So we've talked a lot about the sort of like network and the citywide efforts that you're part of, and I want to just zoom in a little bit to the neighborhood scale, and look at this Love Where You Live campaign that is taking place in places like Nicetown and Tioga. So can you talk a little bit about that project and some of the engagement efforts that helped shape that idea?
Yeah, and Hazel, you can just flip through. So Love Where You Live is an innovative program focused in the Nicetown and Tioga neighborhoods in North Philadelphia. And we're about 3 years into this project. The origin of the idea was actually a whole wave of articles, maybe 6, 7 years ago, that talked about how the zip code where somebody originated influenced much of their life and health outcomes. And so we said, what if we focused intensely in a place, and in this case, two places, and tried to understand how that place wanted to change, how horticulture could help make that change happen, and then use our networks and resources to try to make it happen. So Nicetown and Tioga are neighborhoods that face inequitable health outcomes in relation to other neighborhoods in Philadelphia. And they were one of 5 neighborhoods where we did outreach to try to find neighborhoods that had interest in this. And leaders in that neighborhood were interested, and we guided them through a process which began not with questions about horticulture, but what did they want to change about the neighborhood, right? What were their goals for changing life in the neighborhood? And did really intensive community engagement and outreach. We have a stipended leadership team called the Green Team, which you saw in one of the previous slides. And things came out around youth engagement, employment access, litter cleanup, etc. We then devised a set of horticultural interventions that could help achieve those goals for the neighborhood. Uh, and then we set about resourcing it. So we used our network of individual donors, of institutional partners, and we went to work. And this slide is a neighbor and a couple PHS staff actually replanting a street called Rowan Street Walkway with plants from, I think, the 2021 flower show, which was kind of amazing. But basically, we put PHS capacity under neighborhood capacity to help support the neighborhood in achieving its goals. We have 2 employees that are based in the neighborhood who work under the local community development corporations. And what's really different about this than our other work is it's about helping these neighborhoods achieve their goals. It is not about just expanding tree tenders or community gardens. So the tools and the expressions look like things we do in other neighborhoods, but here it's being thought of strategically and comprehensively. And we have this on the ground capacity working under the neighborhood. And what is very different from many neighborhood interventions, certainly in Philadelphia, is it's not tied to the term of a grant. So we've made a long-term commitment to this neighborhood. We've taken on the responsibility to find the resources to continue this work so that if the neighborhood makes a long-term commitment to us, we make a long-term commitment to the neighborhood versus other initiatives that often say, the grant period is 2 or 3 years and we're here and then we're going to be gone. And that design piece was critical. And it's something we learned in some early research we did while exploring this idea was that neighborhoods felt, almost ricocheted around the different project of the moment, and having continuity was key. So it's been a really powerful project. It's in year 3. It's sort of maturing into its long-term maintenance phase. But we've established tree tender group. You saw a picture of the youth tree tenders program last summer, which was a pilot. We have these beautification projects like you see here, a couple community gardens, and you even saw an image there of the Unity Supper, which was a partnership with CMAC, which is a community development corp in South Philly, where 2 neighborhoods came together for food and music celebration to build unity through greening. So a very, very cool project that we hope to replicate in other places, should we be able to find the resources and the interest.
What I love about that is that, we all know the problems that neighborhoods face that are not just limited to the built environment, but by actually fixing our neighborhood and making it more livable and wonderful, there are opportunities to build skills and have jobs and engage young people and get young people and older people connecting and meeting with each other, and new residents and old residents. And lo and behold, it's not just a built environment solution. It's a more comprehensive look at what is it that we're trying to do in our neighborhoods to increase quality of life economically, socially, environmentally. And to do that through plans, as you said, sort of at the outset, is a very different way of talking about those questions that may have some more accessibility to folks who, when you say words like workforce development, economic, that those are very abstract concepts, but this is very applied.
Yeah, I mean, like a simple example is if we're going to spend more money on trees in Philadelphia, or if we're going to plant trees in Philadelphia, for us, the first pass was to use it to create social cohesion. So you talked about epicenter of tree tenders. That's a bunch of people who have relationships that wouldn't have existed otherwise. The tree canopy gives benefits. That also gives benefits. And then if you're going to start to expand investment, why not do it in a way that creates employment and wealth creation opportunities for local residents? It takes work, but it's where you start to harness that physical fabric of the city to transform the social and economic and environmental outcomes.
Well, and I know for a lot of urbanists in the audience, there's a lot of concern about what is called green gentrification. that if environmental interventions make a place more attractive and livable, that just paves the way for capital to come in and displace legacy residents, long-term residents. And that there's often a feeling that I've heard expressed from different groups that like, oh, this bike lane is for the next group that's going to come, or this park is for the next group that's going to come after I'm pushed out. And when you frame those kind of design and built environment and ecological interventions as a locally determined, locally driven source of employment and social connection and political organizing, that's a very different conversation than somebody's going to plop down a really fancy park in your neighborhood that you didn't have any sense of designing. And you have no voice in what's going on in that sense of, we were here for the decline, but now as it is on the upswing, we're going to be pushed out. And that's a concern I know a lot of people have.
I think yes, I think everything we do is led by neighborhood and deeply involved with neighborhood. The problem you pose is an imperfect solution because it also is not, if people wish to have elements in their neighborhood, it seems unfair to tell them that it's not something that they should seek. And so I think, like any urban, you talked about cities as systems of systems, like you need good housing policy and you need good green interventions. I think the idea that people can't access the kinds of green element and quality of life that they want, and that they're told that it's a choice of that or displacement is a sign of broader failed policy.
100%, 100%, right? And so, by raising these questions in one area, it raises them in every other area. And that is in and of itself an important function.
Yeah.
One of the things you said before that really strikes me is like thousands of people doing this, thousands of people doing that. There are so many people involved with the initiatives that PHS is coordinating. So can you just talk a little bit about how you attract and engage individual supporters, volunteers, and funders and corporate partners to kind of collectively make Philadelphia a greener city?
Yeah. So I think that the first is like a mindset, which is we don't approach our work as we have an idea, we're going to go seek a grant and we're going to do it. And when the grant expires, it's over. We think about, we enter into delivering a service or doing an activity and it's going to be long lived. And for that to work, you have to have lots of different people working on it, lots of different people paying for it because people are going to come and go over time. So we have a broad open door. So three biggest entry points for us are volunteering. So tens of thousands of people that volunteer, from tree tenders to flower show to working in community gardens. We invite people to become members of PHS, which is I could use the public radio slogan, like, we're going to provide it to you anyway, but if you value it and you can, like, please chip in, and becoming a member is the way to do that. And then we do a lot of outreach and engagement. So the flower show is 250,000 people in a strong year. Our pop-up gardens serve 100,000 people. We do tabling at neighborhood events. We do hundreds of classes and workshops per year. And all of these create opportunities for us to meet and interact with people. And we work hard through, all of the communication and marketing means to bring those people into deeper relationship and become members and volunteers. I think an important idea is we try to give people things to do. So becoming a tree tender immediately puts you in a community of people that are caring for trees. If you're the neighbor of a land care lot, you'll have outreach as that lot goes into maintenance, and you'll begin a dialogue with our staff. If you do the flower show, right? The flower show has Philadelphians, from high school students to people growing one specimen plant in their living room, all the way to top level professionals, and everyone can participate. Anybody can enter. So very low barrier to entry, very broad open door, strong invitation into becoming part of PHS, and then having something to do, some role to play in creating this healthier region through horticulture, and constantly trying to expand that network, invite people in, get them involved. And one of our blessings and curses is many people are like, oh yeah, there's a group in my neighborhood that plants trees, but I don't know about PHS. And you're like, well, that's actually a PHS tree tender group. Like, come join the club. And helping people understand that they can be part of achieving the things that they wish for their neighborhood or for the region by becoming part of PHS is one of our challenges that we keep trying to overcome.
Well, I hope that this conversation and the people who are on this will hear that message loud and clear and understand the connection that PHS provides to so many like disparate efforts that would be disparate without your coordinating function. And so, how does the this idea of a green living plan kind of embody some of these principles and practices?
This was interesting. So when the mayoral election was approaching last time, before Mayor Parker was elected, we realized that there was no environmental agenda for the mayor, and there was no obvious entity to create one. And so Casey Kuklik, who was an employee at the time, started reaching out to large and small partners around the city to talk about like, was there interest in creating an environmental agenda? We found interest, we found support from the William Penn Foundation. And as that group came together, what was really powerful about it was because it had a large mix of large organizations, smaller organizations, statewide, local, et cetera, people were able to have a dialogue about how voters felt about environmental issues. And the prevailing sense was in the city of Philadelphia, for most people, meat and potatoes quality of life issues were far ahead of lofty climate change priorities for them. And yet, what we know from our work is that these things tie together. So you clean and green vacant lots, you have a safer neighborhood. But historically, environmental agendas had led with like, we need, to reduce climate, carbon, all of the things that we know to be true. But what voters wanted to hear is, I want employment, I want a safer neighborhood, I want a cleaner neighborhood, I want opportunity for my family and kids. And so the Green Living Plan actually created a pretty ambitious environmental agenda that began with the idea that these environmental actions were an effective way to address the quality of life issues of greatest concern to Philadelphians. And we were able through that project to amplify the voices of organizations that would have never penetrated to the citywide or regional scale in electoral campaign. And then with support from William Penn Foundation for about a year after, we were able to retain lobbyists that kept the Green Living Plan front and center and kept resources flowing into things like water repairs and the tree plan and other things that would not have gotten attention had there not been that kind of collaborative work. So our work to build that network, our ability to be in relationship with lots of organizations from the beginning, their willingness to join in the team actually yielded a level of visibility and influence for organizations that otherwise would have operated far below the radar screen.
That's really fascinating. I mean, one of the things I really love about the Philly tree fan engagement was these yard signs that said love trees or hate trees. And I thought, what a provocative framing, because I don't think people really hate trees. But what happens is, people are like, don't talk to me about trees. Trees are tearing up my sidewalk and trees are growing into the foundation of my house. And I've got these really urgent problems. And here you are talking to me about trees. And what is so great about the incredible level of engagement people had with the tree plan and with the other things we're talking about is that they could see what was just under the surface of their concerns, which is actually we can have all of these things and get the outcomes that we deserve in our neighborhoods. We don't have to give up the trees in order to get, actually, if we get the trees and other things, like we're saying, then these bigger conversations can happen. And I think that's just such a really rich way of reframing a kind of reactiveness that a lot of Philadelphians feel about things like trees or things like I'm involved in arts and culture, to really reframe actually these things are all of ours. And if we do them in connection, we can actually have a better lived experience of Philadelphia. It's not just an ornament or a frill, it's actually integral to that.
And I think to throw a giant bomb into a good conversation, I think one of our challenges as a city in both arts and culture in this work is being comfortable imagining a state that's even better than today, because that does require an openness to change. And so it is impossible to maintain a status quo, right? A status quo is a state of decline. And we as a city do struggle with the idea of envisioning something different and therefore for better. So with trees, I think the tree plan did a really nice job of helping people understand why the conditions today that they don't like might be, which then opens up people to more. On the arts and culture side, I've been in a lot of dialogues, which is like, let's never say save the arts again. Let's talk
Yeah.
about how the arts should actually grow and change in this city and make that the headline. And it is a way of moving people into a generative space rather than a defensive space. And I think
Well,
the tree
and
plan has nailed that.
Well, and I think what I feel about arts and culture is that instead of thinking it's something that professionals do and we witness, it's something that all of us do and ought to do. It's our birthright, it's our cultural legacy, it's part of our human flourishing, and we all need to be creating. And horticulture is the same, right? If we feel that like a plant is only something that you experience if someone is like coming in from outside to put it in your area, like that's not really the story, especially, historically speaking. That wasn't really an option, right? If you wanted some fruit, you couldn't go buy it. You had to plant it. So really reframing things like horticulture and other forms of culture as something that we all need to participate in. And when we're all active in the creation and the stewardship of those systems, then we want to see them increase because they naturally reinforce our sense of quality of life and lived experience.
I completely agree with you. And I think that for anybody on the call to look at tree canopy through that lens, look at the flower show through that lens, and realize that these are not created from on high. These are created from dollars, hours, effort, creativity from Philadelphians of an incredible array of lived experience. And the collective output is the thing, the shady street on a summer day or the beauty of the flower show. It's created by you, by all of us, for all of us.
We're, as always with these conversations, short on time. I want to do lightning round of two quick questions that came in from our audience that are great. The first is, what role, if any, does Saul High School play in your work? And of course, for those who don't know, Saul High School is our incredibly loved agricultural high school in the public school system.
And many people may not know that it's, I think, the only dedicated agriculture high school in the state of Pennsylvania, where agriculture is the number one industry. Saul is a good partner in multiple ways. The most visible is they exhibit in the Philadelphia Flower Show, which is a capstone project for their students. And so be sure to check it out and say hi to the students when you come.
And the second question is about the I-95 corridor. Carol says traffic is increasing, air quality is going down. I live really close, and it's really hard. So how can you, as only one stakeholder in a big coalition of actors thinking about quality of life and quality of air across the region, sort of think about I-95 and the changes that are coming there?
The good thing for me to take back and think about, we're in lots of different conversations, and we do a lot of work with the Delaware River Waterfront Corp, maintaining landscapes along the river. So we're involved in that neck of the woods, not probably as far north as Carol is talking, but I'll take it back in consideration for what we could do.
That's great. There's another comment. Someone's asking to have someone from PHS reach out to them with a very specific answer. So we're going to capture your name, Stephen, and reach out to you afterwards. As we begin to wrap up, Matt, I just want to ask, we call everyone who comes on this program urban strategists, whether they think they are or not. So calling you an honorary urban strategist, is there a sort of catalytic experience or memory that you have of any kind of encounter where you sort of saw this notion of systems and how you could participate in making your environment, your world, a healthier place?
So, two pieces of advice. The first is particularly for those early in career, like just do lots of different jobs and don't worry about whether it's the perfect path. I've worked in retail and restaurants. I've been a commercial corridor manager. I was the archivist in Fairmount Park. I've been a consultant, and what you do is slowly just accrue skills and points of view on the world that help you think about something as complex as cities, right? They're immensely complex. And the more different roles you can put yourself in, the more different people you can meet, the better you can understand the complexity. The second is the most powerful thing you can do to understand cities is spend time as a pedestrian and a transit rider. And, one of my hobbies is to pick two train stations or transit stations, take a paper map, strike a straight line and pencil between the two, and then just go walking and use that line as a reference point to know whether you're on your path to the station. But otherwise, you're just walking through people's neighborhoods as you would the wilderness. And what you're doing is seeing how people live, how they work, how they play, and you're getting insights. You might talk to people, you might see, but that power of observation gets you, and doing it for hours or a day opens up creative space for you to imagine and understand in new ways. So go for a walk.
I love that, Matt. When I was in grad school, I had a lot of studying to do. And so I decided that I would try to go to as many Philadelphia branch libraries around the city as I could when I was doing my homework. And I probably went to 20, 25 of them. And it was unforgettable to be in those different neighborhoods, those different buildings, the different languages that different libraries emphasize. Just it's a similar kind of, experience of the richness of what we have here.
Yep. And just putting a system like that, like I'm going to hit every library, that's a powerful way to move you around. I
You
had a
have to,
job,
yeah.
I mean, to be specific, I had a job early on in Fremont Park where I would be deployed to answer questions. People would say, what's up with building on Pine Road in the Northeast? And I just have to go and see it. So I found myself in every corner of the city looking at neighborhood parks, and it's a similar dynamic to your library experience. But pushing yourself out into the world and just seeing and exploring is the most powerful thing you can do.
Well, Matt, I want to thank you for joining us today on the program. It's been so incredible to talk to you. If you like what you hear, we talk about these things all the time in the Urban Strategy Graduate Program at Drexel. Hazel can put a link into the chat for you if you want to learn more about it. And you're welcome to reach out to me about the academic offerings that we have here at Drexel. It's an honor to be able to have these conversations with people like you, Matt, and it's also an honor to have Urban Strategy in the Present Tense produced by the Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation at Drexel University, with the Westfall College of Media Arts and Design. And I am your host, Andrew Zitzer, and I want to thank our producer, Thomas Devaney, and our production director, Hazel DeQuito. Stay tuned for more episodes coming up soon.